They never meant to find it. Not really. The island did not appear on modern maps, not on satellite scans, not in naval records, not even in the broken memoirs of colonists and drifters. But it was there, always had been, tucked behind swells of mist and currents that seemed to shift like living things, protecting the coastline with a silence that felt conscious. The sea itself warned against it, a perimeter of wrecks half submerged in kelp and iron rot. Fishermen spoke of compass, needles spinning wild. Divers whispered of strange sounds rising from the deep clicks and howls without origin, like echoes from another era. But curiosity, that old curse, pulled them closer, and there it was, rising from the ocean like a carcass breaking the surface. Not with volcanic grandeur or tropical beauty, but with something older, something that felt wrong. The island was jagged, like it had been clawed into existence. Black cliffs knifed upward toward a sky that seemed darker above it. Vegetation clung to the rock in spiny, unnatural tangles. The trees were the first sign. They leaned inward, their trunks warped as if trying to flee something at the center, and there was no birdsong. It's only the drone of insects, thick and low, like a living fog when the first boots touched shore. The air changed, denser, heavy, not with humidity, but with weight, like standing inside something's throat. The sand was coarse and littered with bone fragments, bleached white by a sun that somehow never quite warmed the skin. Some looked like fish bones, others like birds, and some longer twisted alien didn't seem to belong to any known animal. The team said little. Cameras clicked, GPS coordinates were logged, but none of it felt right. Even the insects behaved strangely, crawling in synchronized spirals around exposed skin, as if mapping it. The deeper inland they went, the more time unraveled. Trees grew in impossible formations, root systems above ground like skeletal fingers, leaves veined in black. Some plants hissed when touched, releasing clouds of spores that stank of copper and rot. A stream ran red with silt, bubbling despite no visible heat source. Along the banks, claw marks scored into stone. Not from tools, not from machinery, but from something alive, something strong, something ancient. It was the bones that confirmed their fears, at first scattered, then clustered, and stacked, arranged in deliberate ways like offerings. Jawbones hung from vines, skulls placed facing east, rib cages inverted and tied together with sinew, long fossilized into stone. One pile near the base of a cliff face was nearly human, except for the teeth, too many, too sharp, too deep into the jaw. Evolution doesn't work that way, not unless it's forced. The team found a cave, or perhaps it found them. It gaped in the rock like a wound, the surrounding stones stained black as if burnt. Inside, the light vanished quickly, swallowed in a darkness that did not feel empty. They lit flares. The walls were covered in etchings, not art, not language, but impressions, as if something with claws or teeth or bone had pressed against the stone for so long it left its shape behind. Thousands of overlapping marks. A record, perhaps, not written in ink, but in presence. That night the wind changed. It came from the sea, but it carried with it the scent of meat and decay, a feral perfume that didn't belong to any ecosystem. The team woke to find drag marks outside their tents. No footprints, no animal tracks, just impressions, like something with too many legs had slithered past, dragging something heavy behind it. Cameras malfunctioned, batteries drained. GPS signals failed. The island had closed its grip. Back at the landing site, their boat had shifted. Not broken, not damaged, just moved, as if nudged, as if inspected. Something had opened the engine casing. No marks, no scratches, just the oily prints of something not made of fingers. The sea around them had gone flat, mirror-like dead. Still the color of iron, not even the insects made noise now. The island was watching. The next morning, they found the first full skeleton, nestled in a shallow basin near the tree line, half buried in ash. It was something quadrupedal, mammalian perhaps, with a skull too large for its body and teeth. Far too many. The spine curved unnaturally, vertebrae doubling back on themselves. There were 2 femurs and a third bone running alongside, like an evolutionary experiment left unfinished. The ribs had grown around the lungs in a cage that suggested fear more than protection. Something had warped this creature not just physically but psychologically. You could feel it even in the fossil. It had been afraid of itself. The lead paleontologist tried to catalog it. He failed. Every trait contradicted another. It was as if multiple species had been spliced across generations, not by human hand, but by time itself breaking down under pressure. Named it Specimen Null. The label meant nothing, just an attempt to trap something unknowable in scientific order. It didn't work. The nightmares began soon after. The entire crew shared them. Dreams of an island growing teeth, birds with empty eyes nesting in rib cages, of being buried alive beneath layers of evolving skin. Some woke up with bloodied fingernails, having clawed at the ground in their sleep. One screamed until his throat bled. Another walked into the sea and had to be pulled back. He kept whispering, "It's beneath us. It's still beneath us." A seismic scan was ordered. The results made no sense. The island had no solid bedrock. Its foundation was hollow, as if built on caverns. Some chambers measured hundreds of meters across. There were anomalies. Perfect geometric patterns in the sediment, spherical voids that absorbed radar. One chamber pulsed with heat, though no volcanic activity was recorded. They sent a probe. It never came back, only static. Once the sound of breathing, wet, slow, enormous. One researcher found a fossil that shouldn't exist, a bird but with teeth. Not in its beak, but in its throat, serrated, pointed inward. Designed not to eat, but to trap. The wings had bones too dense for flight. Instead, they had spurs, bone knives at the joints. Its eyes were forward-facing, predatory. When asked what genus it might belong to, he only said, "It's not from here." And he didn't mean the island. They found human bones next. Old, weathered, but not ancient. Maybe a few hundred years. One still had the remnants of a belt buckle, European in design. A lost expedition, perhaps. But the bones were fused strangely. Growths along the spine, extra digits. The skull was flattened, crushed inward, not by trauma, but growth, as if something had bloomed inside it. The air grew heavier. Radios failed. Time felt warped. Minutes stretched. Hours vanished. Watches ticked off beat. Some began to speak of déjà vu. One geologist claimed he had mapped this island in a dream decades ago. He showed them his childhood notebook, and there it was, a sketch of the cliffs, the cave mouth, even the trees. No one laughed. No one could. One night, they heard it. From the jungle. Not an animal call, not mechanical. Something between. Rhythmic. Wet, like lungs filled with sand. Something was breathing, not in the way animals do, but the way landscapes might, if they had mouths. The sound moved first behind them, then above them, then under their feet. The island was alive. It was no longer pretending otherwise. The oldest member of the crew, an indigenous tracker who had joined out of curiosity, not science, took a stone from the cave wall and shattered his own compass. He said the island was not a place, but a memory. Something the earth had tried to forget. A scar reopened, said it had waited too long, and now it was waking up. When asked what it was, he said nothing, just wept. They fled the next morning. The sea had returned to motion reluctantly. The boat sputtered back to life. No one looked back. No one took samples. They left the bones, the footage, the journals. All of it. Because some truths aren't meant to be carried off sacred ground. Back on the mainland, the symptoms persisted. Nightmares, fevers, nosebleeds. One member went blind. Another disappeared entirely. Their footage corrupted, every frame warped into spirals. Every soundbite overtaken by low guttural tones beneath the human range. Only one image survived, a still from a drone feed. A shadow moving between trees, tall and narrow, arms too long, head tilted upward as if scenting the sky. The island is gone now. At least, that's what the satellite shows. just open ocean. Nothing but waves. But fishermen still speak of a place the sea avoids, a stillness that moves, a fog that returns every full moon. And sometimes, just sometimes, something washes up on nearby shores, a feather made of chitin, a jaw with 3 hinges, a fossil that hums when the tide changes. They say some lands are born of volcanic fire, others of tectonic rage. But this island, this one was born of hunger. It waits still, beneath the sea, beneath memory, beneath reason, waiting to be found again. Evolution was never meant to be merciful. It is not the story of progress, but of pressure, silent, slow, and suffocating. And nowhere is that pressure more cruel, more inventive, more monstrous than in isolation. On islands carved from forgotten time, evolution turns in on itself. It folds, it festers. It invents creatures, not through design, but desperation. There are no predators to chase you into agility, no competition to keep you sharp, no escape when your body becomes your cage. In these prisons of paradise, animals don't just evolve, they unravel. This island, the one that should not exist, was the perfect laboratory. Surrounded by black surf and hidden by currents that tricked even the wind, it was sealed off for millennia. A dome of silence, an arc of mutations. Here evolution did not follow Darwin's soft metaphors. It obeyed only hunger, and fear, and time. The first signs of its madness were subtle. Fossils of familiar creatures, rats, lizards, shrews, but subtly wrong. Femurs bent at impossible angles, like skulls with extra sockets, teeth growing inward. Creatures that once had roles, predator, prey, scavenger, were blurred together, like ink smeared across the page of a biology textbook. The balance of nature had not just shifted, it had broken its spine. Somewhere in the island's tangled forest, a new branch of reality grew. The rulebook of size, the island rule twisted into a nightmare of scale. Small animals ballooned, as if fed by nightmares instead of food. Harmless mice became cat-sized, with rodent incisors thickened into tusks. Their bones showed evidence of tool use, not from intelligence, but from learned brutality. Scratches on stones arranged in patterns, traps built from vine and thorn. The suggestion was chilling. They had begun to organize. Meanwhile, large animals withered into dwarf grotesqueries. Fossilized deer, no larger than dogs. Their antlers shriveled and fused into bizarre crowns of bone. Elephants, or what was left of them, became pathetic shadows of their ancestors. No taller than a child, yet disproportionately heavy. Their feet curled inward, their tusks malformed into spirals. Evolution, without the guiding hand of a vast ecosystem, had turned inward and fed on itself. But this was not random. No, this was directional, toward something, as if the island was selecting not for survival, but for strangeness, for isolation so deep it became its own logic. Even time warped here. Radiocarbon dating showed impossible overlaps. Fossils from supposedly extinct creatures appeared alongside those from far younger species, trilobite shells next to monkey bones. Something had gone wrong with the sequence, or something was forcing it to overlap, grinding the gears of time until every epoch bled into the next. In the underbrush, the reptiles ruled. Not in the old sense, not dinosaurs or dragons, but a lineage that had warped into caricature. Giant skinks 8 feet long, their jaws reinforced with calcified plates. They had no predators and no competition. But their skeletons told another story: cannibalism. Bite marks that matched their own kind. Clutch nests torn apart from within. Mating rituals that ended in death. When nature has no enemy, it turns itself into one. One particular specimen disturbed the team. A bird, at least genetically. But its wings had ossified into shields. Its beak had split vertically. Inside its fossilized chest cavity, not a heart, but a hollow sphere of bone, like a rattle, a sound chamber, a warning mechanism. Its bones were often found near the skeletons of smaller animals, all of them with shattered skulls. The implication: this bird had used sound as a weapon. Then came the insects. Amber. Deposits leaked from the bark of twisted trees. Within them, perfectly preserved monstrosities, ants with external spines, mandibles like calipers, thoraxes bloated with fungal sacs. One species had grown translucent plates over its eyes, creating a lens system never before documented. Another had wings but no means of flight. Instead, it used them to signal, to flash, a lure, a threat, no one could say. But one thing was clear. On this island, insects had become architects of fear. Even the water betrayed life. In one stagnant pond, microbial mats pulsed with internal movement. DNA analysis revealed nothing conclusive. The life there was unclassifiable. A viral soup of ancient genes, hybrid strands, and protein chains that didn't match any known tree of life. It wasn't bacteria. It wasn't algae. It was something other, as if life had rebooted itself in isolation. The forest canopy told another tale. Vines with barbed hair-like protrusions. Fungi that glowed only in the presence of carbon dioxide exhaled from lungs. One team member claimed the trees whispered at night. Not voices, exactly, but breathing, timed with theirs, as if the forest was practicing respiration. Preparing in one clearing, they found a spiral not made of rock or fossil, but bones. Vertebrae arranged with surgical precision. Hundreds of them. A spiral pointing inward toward a pit. Not deep, just wide enough to fall into. No one did. Not after the tracker said it reminded him of burial circles found in the oldest parts of Asia, Neolithic death traps. Meant not for disposal, but for return. Another day, they stumbled across a corpse. Fresh, a wild boar, its hide torn in strips. But it wasn't the wounds that disturbed them. It was the limbs they had bent. Outward, broken from within. Its bones had grown during decomposition, elongated, as if something in the soil triggered post-mortem mutation. The biologist simply whispered, "That's not supposed to happen," and began vomiting. Birdsong was still absent, always absent. It was the silence between insect calls that unnerved them most. One ornithologist claimed birds had existed here. Fossil remains confirmed it. But all showed deformities. Skulls too large, beaks that folded like insect mandibles. Their sternums were cracked, consistently across generations. She theorized they'd lost the will to fly, not ability, will. As if gravity itself became comforting. Or surrender was selected as a trait. In the eastern cliffside, erosion had revealed something older. Fossils embedded in blue-black shale. Amphibians, perhaps, but the jaws were beak-shaped. Cartilage structures suggested ultrasonic abilities. And clustered in the same sediment, human-like footprints. Not bare. Clawed. Digitigrade, they ran alongside the amphibian remains for several meters, then stopped. As if whatever had been walking simply left. The tracker would not step further. He said the stones sounded wrong. The others dismissed him until their field microphones began to pick up subsonic tremors. Not geological, biological, something. In the stone was humming, alive. Beneath, they tried to leave that day. The tide refused them. The boat sat, bobbing gently, engines functional, but the sea had grown thick, viscous, like oil. The water around the island shimmered in patterns, not random, but deliberate. Waves moved in contradiction. A school of fish floated belly up in perfect formation, spelling nothing but hinting at intention. The island would not release them. They returned inland. To wait, to survive. But the island began to change. Familiar paths shifted. Landmarks disappeared. GPS coordinates reversed. One member wandered only 300 feet and returned with aged wrinkles around his eyes. He claimed to have been gone for days. His food was untouched, his canteen full. He had drawings he did not remember making of long-necked deer with human fingers, of birds with faces, of trees weeping blood at night. Glowing eyes watched from the branches, not animal eyes, not glassy and instinctual. These were curious, observant, patient. One pair blinked in perfect sync with the blinking red light of their broken drone. The connection was not mechanical, it was mockery. In a final attempt to understand, the team set up a time-lapse camera in a valley filled with skeletons. For 72 hours it recorded, then abruptly stopped. What survived on the tape was horrifying. The bones moved. Not animated, not risen from the dead, but rearranged by something fast, unseen. Shapes began to take form in the pile, a spiral, a figurate, a sigil. And then, suddenly, the bones began to vanish, one by one, as if eaten by the air itself. In reverse, that night, the youngest member of the crew carved something into the dirt. The island is remembering itself. No one slept. The tracker said one final thing before he disappeared. It's not evolution. It's recollection. The animals are remembering older versions of themselves, and the island is helping them. No trace of him was found. It's just his boots, and a trail of bark peeled back from trees as if something large, something tall, had followed him by the time rescue came. There were only 4 survivors. They spoke in riddles. One refused to be touched. Another drew spirals endlessly into the dirt with a stick. One only said, "It's inside me now." Samples collected later from their hair and nails showed chromosomal shifts, small but undeniable. A mutation not found in modern humans. Protein structure similar to an extinct primate from 2 million years ago. One evolutionary biologist whispered, "It's not a virus, it's memory. Genetic memory." And the island gave it back. The rescue crew never returned, and so the island sleeps again. It's waiting for another ship. Another question. At another set of lungs to breathe its air. The curse of isolation is not just in being forgotten. It's in remembering too deeply. Remembering the teeth, the claws, the hunger, remembering what we were. Before we became human, they once marched as kings, across Pleistocene plains. Through the ancient breath of savanna winds, the mammoths and mastodons thundered with the pulse of Earth itself. Great beasts wrapped in wool and bone, titans with memory embedded in every wrinkle. Elephants, in their enormity, were evolution's monuments, a triumph of size, endurance, and morning intelligence. But here, on this island, something unholy happened to them. The bones were the first sign, discovered in a sunken grove beneath layers of volcanic ash and peat, partially exposed by the slow erosion of time. What appeared at first to be infant remains quickly betrayed their true age under analysis. These were not calves. They were adults. Pygmy elephants, if one dares to use that name. But even that is too kind. These were not scaled-down creatures of dignity. They were not miniatures. They were distortions, 3 feet tall at the shoulder, limbs like bent stilts, skulls grotesquely large for their bodies, as if the weight of memory had grown unbearable. Their tusks curled inward like sickle moons, often broken at the tip, often fused. Their sockets black hollows, deep and cavernous suggested eyes, that once knew something and then forgot. Over and over. They stared through time with the silence of things that suffered too long to make noise. 1. Skeletons still had skin impressions fossilized into the soil. A wrinkled hide stretched too, thin over sharp hip bones, the folds marked by what looked like self-inflicted abrasions, rubbing against trees, rocks, or just scratching at something internal. Pain, it seemed, had become their evolutionary companion, but it was their brains that sent the team into silent horror. The endocasts, the natural molds of the inside of their skulls, showed massive swelling in regions linked to memory and fear, disproportionately large amygdalas, frontal lobes compressed, like thoughts had collapsed inward. These creatures, once hailed as Earth's wisest, has been re-engineered by isolation into something that remembered too much and understood too little. They lived in fear. Not from predators. None have been found in their fossil layers. Not from starvation. Vegetation pollen was plentiful. The data was consistent. These elephants had lived in terror of something else, perhaps of themselves. Teeth told more than any book. In normal elephants, molars cycled through 6 times in a lifetime. Here on the island, they found jawbones where molars had grown in 10 times. Each new set erupting before the last fully formed. Multiple rows, colliding structures. Some jaws had collapsed entirely, a pathology of overcompensation. As if evolution had tried again and again and again to fix a problem without knowing what that problem was, eating became agony. Starvation became internal. They died with mouths full of bones. Nearby, they found a burial pit. Not a natural death site, but deliberate. Dozens of pygmy elephants arranged in concentric arcs, their trunks curled in unison like petrified question marks. Some skeletons were missing skulls. Others had theirs placed backward. One had a stone embedded in its chest cavity, wrapped in strands of what appeared to be braided grass. A totem? A ritual? No. Predator does this. Accident makes such art. A theory emerged. These elephants buried their own dead. But the team hesitated. Something about the placement suggested more than mourning. Perhaps they weren't burying the fallen. Perhaps they were hiding them. From what? In a small limestone cave adjacent to the burial field, they found strange etchings, scratches mostly, horizontal, vertical, repeating but in patterns no ordinary creature could sustain. Too methodical. The ceiling bore one long groove, as if something large and heavy had raised its head again and again, carving its sorrow into the stone above. The height matched that of the pygmy elephant's stature, and the gouges, made not with tools, with tusks. One paleontologist, a soft-spoken woman who specialized in proboscidean neuroanatomy, wept openly. "This is a prison," she whispered. "They weren't allowed to evolve. They were broken." The strangest remains were found in a sinkhole near the island's northeastern bluff, a vertical shaft filled with bones layered like sediment. At the bottom, perfectly preserved in anaerobic mud, lay a mother and calf curled together. Calf had no eyes, not sockets, but smooth bone where they should have been. A congenital deformity? Maybe, but genetic testing revealed a pattern of repeat anomalies passed down, again and again. Blindness, deafness, deformity. A lineage degenerating in perfect fidelity. Their DNA held anomalies that baffled the team. Mitochondrial mutations. That should have killed them, didn't. Entire chromosomes were rearranged. Gene sequences folded like origami. These creatures were not supposed to exist. They were the aftermath of some long-forgotten evolutionary war, but the most chilling find was not the bones. It was the sound. Inside the burial cave, audio equipment began to pick up low-frequency rumbles, at first thought to be wind or tectonic movement. But when filtered and mapped, the signal formed patterned slow pulses, spaced like language, not vocalizations. Vibrations. Infrasound. Similar to the deep rumbles elephants used to communicate across great distances, but there were no elephants here now. Still, pulses continued. A biologist constructed a simple seismograph and recorded the patterns over days. They repeated, regular, purposeful. One pattern matched that of the distress calls recorded in dying. African elephants' frequencies shifted, stretched like echoes trapped in stone. Could sound survive? Could trauma imprint itself into the earth? 1. Night. The vibrations changed. Louder, faster. The soundscape became chaotic, rising in amplitude until it broke the recorder. The next morning, the burial field had shifted. Nothing had moved, but the sense of order was gone. The concentric circles had warped, become spiral, a message, a warning, a release. The tracker again refused to return to the grove, he muttered. An old word from his grandmother's tongue, a word without translation. Closest meaning, the ones who were forgotten by time, but not by sorrow. These elephants shrunken, twisted, buried beneath an island that shouldn't be, they weren't evolutionary errors. They were sacrifices. One theory gained traction, that these elephants had once arrived here from the mainland, brought by early seafarers. Stranded, they're intelligent, social, perhaps revered, but then came the isolation. And the islands. Hunger, and something shifted. Their minds turned in on themselves, their bodies followed. The final form was not smaller, but smothered. Diminished by despair, Their bones didn't just tell a story of evolution, they told a story of memory. Of what happens when you remember too long in a place that forgets you. Today, pygmy elephants still exist on other islands and fossils. In museum drawers, but none like this. None with skulls this swollen. None with tusks turned inward, as if trying to pierce their own thoughts. None with death pits arranged like ancient script. On the mainland, elephants mourn their dead. They touch the bones, they'll linger. On this island, the bones mourn back. And somewhere, deep in the limestone catacombs, where sound still pulses and the ground breathes beneath fossilized grief, the last echo of a mother's cry moves through. The earth not as sound, but as pressure. Because grief, when it lives long enough, evolves too. There are stories the soil still tells. Even when the mouths of time have long closed, the ground beneath our feet continues to whisper, and sometimes if you listen close beneath the songs of birds, beneath the hush of leaves, you will hear the scratching. Not the wind, not the branches, but the ancient memory of claws. Dragging, digging, tearing. It happened on an island shaped like a blade, adrift in the warm belly of the South Pacific, place untouched by mainland predators, untroubled by tooth and claw for millennia, until evolution, stripped of balance, decided to play its cruelest joke. It began with a single jawbone, unearthed by a volunteer sifting sediment under the thick canopy of fossilized forest. She held it up, thinking it belonged to a dog, perhaps a coyote that somehow made its way across the sea. But there was no enamel pattern like a canine. Ow. Teeth were wrong, too numerous, too flat, or did too gnawed. The incisor had the classic chisel shape, orange stained by iron. Rodent. But the size. This wasn't a rodent. This was a monster in rodent's clothes. When the excavation deepened, the horror swelled. Hundreds of bones, some as small as squirrels, some as large as a shepherd dog, and one colossal and fossil dark, measuring nearly 4 feet from skull to tailbase. The femurs were thicker than a man's wrist, the claws curled like rusted scythes, and the bite radius is consistent with modern wolves. But this wasn't a predator from above, it was a predator from below. Ratus tightnus, that's what they called it, an extinct megafaunal rodent whose size defied everything we thought we knew about rats. But its true name was carved by the ecosystem itself, the eater of the silence, in the absence of cats, hawks, and snake screechers that elsewhere kept the rat in check. This island became a theater for unchecked ambition. Rodents arrived, stowed away on driftwood or clinging to wrecked canoes, small, harmless, and hungry. But the island offered no ceiling to their growth. And so, generation by generation, muscle by muscle, they swelled. First came gigantism, then came aggression, and then something stranger, intelligence. Fossil skulls revealed massive olfactory bulbs, normal for rats but also enlarged prefrontal regions. Decision-making, planning, empathy was absent, strategy was present. The eye sockets faced, slightly forward, depth perception. They weren't just scroungers anymore, they were hunters. A midden pit revealed their diet. Turtle shells split in half, lizard vertebrae pecked clean, bones of seabirds lined up in rows. Few had carvings, not chew marks, not random damage, but patterns, zigzags, spirals. One rock bore a series of grooves so deliberate that a paleontologist fainted. Not because it suggested communication, but because it looked mathematical. Who teaches a rat to count? But the true horror wasn't in the fossils, it was in the tunnels. Subsurface LiDAR scans revealed a massive burrow network beneath the dig site. At first, the team believed them to be natural sinkholes or water runoffs, but they had architecture, support columns, ventilation, shafts, spiral layouts. The deeper ones were blacker than darkness, absorbing all sound. One researcher dropped a pro camera down a shaft. It got stopped transmitting 19 feet in. When retrieved, its lens was shattered. The footage before the break showed teeth marks, and then, one night the scratching began. The base camp, nestled between palm shade and cliff shadow, had grown tense. People heard things, saw things, small shadows in the underbrush. First they laughed. Rats are rats. They scatter. They flee. But these did not flee. At night, food vanished. It's not just snatched, carried off in a chain. Security footage, though grainy, caught a line of figures, low fast, many dragging an entire crate of supplies. Not rats, not raccoons. Something in between, something coordinated. One morning, the team awoke to a circle of bones arranged outside the main tent. Vertebrae only, cleaned, aligned. A warning, a ritual. One vertebra had a small stone placed inside its hollow like an eye forced. Open, they brought in an ecologist specializing in invasive rodent species. He didn't laugh. He didn't sleep either. He merely stared into the jungle and whispered, "This is a failed god." When pressed, he explained, rodents represent adaptability. Give them food in absence of fear, and they become avatars. Of consumption, but remove limits, and they become something else. Not divine, not demonic. Just wrong. Soon, they began finding bite marks on trees, not random, territorial, but strategic, along natural fault lines, near support routes. It was as if something was testing structural weaknesses. One tree, perfectly healthy, toppled in the middle of the night, crushing the mobile lab. The fallen trunk had been chewed through on one side. But rats aren't that smart. Unless they are. The site was evacuated, partly for safety. It's partly because of what they discovered next. Deep within a burrow collapse exposed by a recent storm surge, they found what appeared to be a nursery. Dozens of fetal skeletons. Rats, yes, but mutated. Some had double rows of teeth. Some had vestigial limbs on their spines. One had no face at all, just bone grown over where the mouth should be. But all were buried carefully, arranged in nests, as if mourned. Rats do not bury their young, but these ones had begun to care. The final straw came during a final scan of the cavern systems. A graduate student monitoring motion detectors noticed a rhythmic signal, something massive, breathing, almost sleeping. The signature was slow, purposeful, like a lung. A single large rodent, a queen, or something new. The signal vanished after 18 minutes. When the team returned to the site, all entrances had collapsed. No rats were seen. The air was warm, wet. Like breath, the legend persists in nearby villages. Old men speak of the stone tunnel wolves, rodents so big they used to pull goats into holes. Of nights when the jungle quivered with movement. Of bones on doorsteps, whispering beneath the floorboards. No one goes to the island now. And yet, the rats remain. Not the ordinary kind, but the kind that saw the world change around them and changed with it. The kind that remembered every face, every theft, every trespass. The kind that wait. Rats, it turns out, are not afraid of the dark. They invented it. And somewhere, under a canopy of twisted trees and bones, beneath tunnels lined with teeth, something still stirs. It does not scurry. It does not flee. It waits. Because evolution doesn't care if a creature is hideous. It only cares if it survives. And rats, especially these rats, always do. The sea has always whispered secrets to islands. Sometimes it brings driftwood, sometimes bones, sometimes creatures no one asked for. But every so often, the sea gives something that should never have existed at all. A mistake. A grotesque answer to a question never spoken aloud. This island, choked in fog and green silence, was once a paradise. Lush with fruit, insects, birdsong, a canvas untouched by human war or machine. A haven, perhaps. But isolation is not mercy. Isolation is pressure, evolution's vice. And in this place, time turned its creatures inward. It stripped their purpose and rewrote their function. And so from the forest floor, crawling like a whisper through ancient ferns, came one of Earth's strangest predators, a tortoise. But not the kind that children watch with amusement.
At the harmless slowpoke munching on lettuce in a zoo.
No. This one had blood in its mouth. It began with a photograph. Field biologists in the Indian Ocean archipelago had been documenting seabird nesting patterns. One image, taken hastily, showed something no one could quite explain. A small bird, perhaps a naughty chick, frozen in place. In front of it, a massive tortoise. Mouth open, eyes focused. The next photo, the chick gone. And the tortoise, with red stains on its beak. At first they dismissed it. Fluke, a misunderstanding. Herbivores sometimes nibble carrion, right? Mineral craving? Salt? Mistaken behavior. But the video followed. Low-resolution, shaky but unmistakable. Tortoise approached a live chick, slow, deliberate, no attempt to hide. It moved like a glacier with intent. When the chick fled, it did not escape. The tortoise cornered it, trapped it against a tree root, and then, with a motion horrifying in its finality, bit down. Crunch, swallow. The scientist froze. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't confusion. It was strategy. Soon after, more footage emerged. Tortoises stalking seabird nests, knocking over chicks, waiting near cliffs where frightened birds would tumble down. Some even flipping over shallow stones to expose lizards. Every move was slow, but slow did not mean stupid. The creatures weren't ambush predators in the classic sense. They were inevitability incarnate. On this island, plant life had become seasonal, unpredictable. The tortoises, once peaceful grazers, had grown desperate across millennia of scarcity. Their slow metabolism gave them patience. Their strong jaws, once meant for fibrous leaves, could now crack bone. And their eyes, once dull, had grown sharper, focused, not on foliage, but on movement. A research team tagged several individuals. One, named CT04, displayed a pattern no one expected. It patrolled a specific path every 3 days, always stopping near certain nests, not at random. It had learned their location. Another CT11 waited motionless beside a freshwater stream. For hours, until a young gecko came to drink. One bite. Gone. The team was astonished. But all began to sour into dread, because they weren't just feeding. They were learning, in a study lasting 3 months. Researchers offered both meat and plant-based food in controlled experiments. Not only did the tortoises prefer meat, but those that consumed it showed increased activity, faster growth, and more aggressive territorial displays. One began chasing other tortoises away from a bird nesting site, biting at their limbs, flipping rivals onto their backs. When meat became available, they fought. Worse still, dissection of a recently deceased specimen revealed something stranger: changes to the stomach lining, adaptations for protein digestion, higher acidity, sharp ridges across the tongue to tear, not chew. And inside its gut, feathers, still partially intact, at least 3 different species. This was no accident of behavior. It was a full biological pivot, a slow, monstrous transition from grazers. 2 killers. And then, the first active hunt was recorded. A nesting tern. Weakened by injury, had fallen near the research outpost. Several tortoises approached, drawn by her squawks. One climbed over a small log to reach her, an act requiring strength and motivation far beyond typical reptilian instinct. When she flapped her wings in panic, 2 others arrived. The first tortoise latched onto her neck. The second held down a wing. The third waited near her feet. She screamed, and they shared her. After this, the island changed. Not just biologically, spiritually. The field team rational seculars spoke in whispers. They called the tortoises the old ones, not out of reverence, but out of fear. Because this was not predation as we knew it. It was rehearsed. It was something ancient, reawakened. Tortoises, it turns out, are survivors. They've watched empires fall. They've outlived. Every great extinction, they do not panic. They do not weep. They merely wait. When their world changes, they do not resist. They adapt. And now they had adapted again. To blood, a second island showed similar patterns. This time, the tortoises targeted hatchling iguanas. Bite radius measurements suggested the behavior had been in place for over 500 years. Shell etchings, primitive, almost cave-like depicted shapes many believed were ritualistic. Concentric circles, hatchling silhouettes, and one terrifying image carved onto stone, a tortoise with two heads, one herbivorous, one carnivorous. No tortoise alive had such a feature, but perhaps this was symbolic, a warning or a prophecy. The native islanders told stories of these beasts. Shell devils, they called them, said to live for 300 years, said to taste guilt in the air, said to approach dying people not to comfort, but to feed. Legends told of babies vanishing in the night, of footprints by the cradles, and of dragging sounds on hollow floors, of course. Science dismissed these tales, folklore, superstition, until one child's body was found feet near a known tortoise trail. No evidence of birds, no feral cats. Only one set of tracks, wide, clawed, and reptilian. Even now, the footage sits in archives, rarely shown, often denied. But in the night, beneath the moon's slow orbit, the tortoises roam. They are patient, they are methodical, they have nothing but time, because time favors. The slow, the unblinking, it's the ones who never panic. Tortoises do not chase. They wait for you to stop running, and when you do, they bite. The wind doesn't speak here, it listens. This island, ringed with cliffs like broken teeth and blanketed in the thick silence of ancient canopies, holds a secret above all others, a secret that stares back, not from the ground, where clawed. Terrors stalk, nor from the sea, where sharks once reigned, but from the underbrush, in a shadow so still it feels like it's thinking, watching, waiting. They call it the owl. But that word feels wrong, too soft, too familiar. This is no bedtime. Hunter of mice. No hooting ghost perched in barns. No feathered poet of the twilight. This is something else, a predator carved by starvation, isolation, and a silence so absolute that it turns sound into a weapon. It began with a scream, not a bird's, a young zoologist had ventured. Too far in land-chasing rumors of odd avian tracks, wide as dinner plates, pressed deep into volcanic ash. She radioed once, said she saw eyes in the fern wall, said they weren't blinking, and static. They found her the next day. Her skull was intact. Her throat was not. Whatever had killed her hadn't feasted. It had crushed. Snapped the neck, a surgical kill, and near her body, 3 things: a pile of owl pellets, a feather longer than a human forearm, and in the moss beside her massive talon marks, dug 6 inches into the earth. What kind of owl can do that? The answer lies in the bones. Paleontologists had once unearthed fragments on this very island, decades ago, vertebrae, too thick for modern birds,
Ow.
with sternums ribbed like battering rams. At the time, they guessed these belonged to some extinct stork or heron, something awkward, harmless. But then came the skulls. Round, flat-faced, binocular sockets, forward-facing, owls, but giants. Standing over a meter tall. Maybe more and worse. Flightless. At some point in evolutionary exile, these apex owls had clipped their own wings. Not by choice, but by adaptation. Flight was no longer a necessity. These beasts had found power in silence and foot. They became shadows that walked. And on an island where no large predators remained, they rose to dominance not in flocks, but in solitary nightmares. They hunt alone. Always alone, like monks of the hunt. Cameras caught only flashes. A blur across the undergrowth, a heavy branch, bouncing after a delay, then gone. But the kills left behind were unmistakable. A goat neck turned backward, fox gutted but untouched otherwise. Even a wild boar trampled and crushed beneath the weight of something massive. Researchers dubbed them Strix titanica, not simply because of their size, but their method. They don't ambush, they stalk. For hours, days, sometimes, using forests, as acoustic traps, every branch, every footfall, mapped, predicted. They step only on moss. They time their approach with wind. They use our own breath to mask theirs. Thermal imaging showed the truth. Their legs are grotesquely long, coiled with dense muscle. Their talons curve like sickles, more akin to velociraptors than birds. But it's their face, the flat, dish-like satellite of skin and bone that betrays their true horror. Built to channel sound with pinpoint precision. They don't see their prey. They hear your lungs expanding. They taste your heartbeat. One researcher slept in the jungle overnight. He wore a sound recorder near his chest. Hoping to capture nocturnal behavior, he woke up untouched, but the recorder, when played back, revealed something that curdled blood, a full hour where nothing happened. Then, one footstep, silence, another closer, and then breathing, not his, something lower, heavier, the sound of feathers brushing leaves, of air being parted. Then a whisper, a sound like a low, throaty click repeated every 14 seconds. It stayed for 2 hours. Never attacked. Just listened. When dawn broke, it was gone, but its impression remained. 2 deep claw marks beside the tent, as if it had braced itself. Just to listen closer, this was not a bird of instinct. It was a surgeon of silence. Field notes revealed stranger behaviors. One owl, nicknamed the Bishop, would return to the same perch every sunset, not to roost, but to watch. Always facing the camp, never moving. When the team tried to approach, it vanished. No sound, no feathers left behind, only that haunting habit, always present, always still. The locals told older tales, myths of forest judges, owls that would visit the hut of a liar and press their faces to the window. If you confessed your crime, they would leave. If you lied, they would wait until you slept, and then they'd enter. No one knows how, but the bodies were always found the same, unmauled, eyes wide open, throats crushed. The coroner's notes often read the same line, no struggle. In the scientific community, this posed a dilemma. Was this a predator or something more? Some suggested these owls had developed proto-consciousness, rudimentary problem-solving, facial recognition, emotional memory. One test showed that a juvenile owl avoided a researcher who had once handled it roughly years after their last encounter. Others claimed that some owls could mimic sounds, cries, coughs, even human speech patterns. Not perfectly, but enough to confuse. One night, a researcher heard his own voice calling for help from inside the woods. He went in. He didn't come back. Later, they found his flashlight cracked in half, and near it the long groove of something heavy being dragged away, not carried. Dragged. One last horror remained, the breeding grounds it took weeks to find. A rocky escarpment where the trees gave way to crumbling cliff. There, under a canopy of twisted roots, were the nests. Not woven like normal birds, but carved. Deep bowls dug into soil and bone, lined not with leaves but with fur. With skin dot inside, the chicks, monstrous things, all eyes and feet, bluffless, pale, they hissed when approached, when a long boom echoed from the forest, a signal. Of sorts they froze, silent, as if trained. And then came the mother. She was massive, nearly 4 feet tall, eyes black as night, flecked with an inner red glow when light hit just right. Her neck feathers flared, her beak opened, not to shriek, but to click, rhythmic, echoing off the stones. One by one, her chicks clicked back. In harmony, a language, primitive, terrifying, coordinated. This wasn't just evolution. It was an empire in feathers, a civilization, built on sound, silence, and memory. What happens when such creatures evolve just a little further, when the forests grow quieter, when prey grows smarter, and the owl, that eternal symbol of wisdom, decides that knowledge is best served with a side of flesh? We speak of ancient gods and myths, but perhaps we've always known them, felt them, watched by them. Owls, after all, do not blink, they judge. A rat, the size of a wolf, with teeth thick as fingers. Jaws hinged not for nibbling, but for crushing, and eyes not beady, not frantic-focused. We like to mock rodents, to laugh at rats, to treat them as vermin, as mindless gnawers of trash. But this species did not scurry, did not hide in the cracks. It stood still, upright, waiting. Neo, Hebridomys, Rex, the king of the island. It began as an accident. A zoologist tracking lemur fossils stumbled upon a skull half buried in clay. She assumed it belonged to some long-extinct monkey. The shape was wrong to low-slung, to flattened, but the size, the bulk, seemed primate, until she saw the teeth. For incisors, each the length of her thumb, sharpened to a chisel's edge. Molars arranged like millstones. And most disturbingly, the zygomatic arches so thick, so unnaturally reinforced that it seemed the creature's entire head was built to withstand impact. It wasn't prey, it was a battering ram. Later digs revealed femurs the length of human arms. Vertebrae thick as bricks, claws curved, yellowed, made not for digging, but for slicing bark, or something softer. But the real terror? The bite radius? Over 1,200 psi? Enough to sever bone, enough to crack skulls. Which is precisely what it did. Littered throughout the fossil bed were shattered monkey skulls fractured cleanly along the crown. No teeth marks, no tearing, just impact. As though something had struck downward with surgical precision. A rodent. It's killing monkeys, not scavenging, not stealing. Hunting. This broke every rule of the food web. Herbivores don't stalk carnivores. Prey does not become predator, but here, on this forgotten island, nature wrote in reverse. Perhaps it was the isolation, it's the loss of natural enemies. It's the gradual increase in body size over millennia evolutionary snowball. With fewer threats, the rodent grew bolder. Its teeth, originally designed for cracking seeds and roots, became weapons of destruction. Its jaw, once a tool of grinding, evolved into a guillotine, and its mind. That grew darker, tracks preserved. In volcanic ash showed something chilling. This rodent followed in pairs. 2 prints, side by side. Wide gaits, coordinated steps, like wolves, like soldiers. One would circle, the other would wait. Monkeys dash agile, clever, loud, were no match. Even high in the canopy, they weren't safe. The rodents could climb. There. Claws, once used to dig burrows, now dug into bark with ease. They could sit motionless for hours, blending into the foliage, becoming just another bump on the branch, till the monkey got too close. Then came the crack. The worst finds came years later, deeper inland, burrows the size of tree trunks. Dug not as homes, but traps. Hollowed spaces beneath fig trees, covered in leaf litter. Inside, piles of bones, monkey femurs, rib cages, skulls stacked in spirals arranged, almost ritualistic. One theory suggested catching, another proposed territorial displays, a third spoken only in quiet conference. Room suggested something far darker, intelligence. One monkey carcass showed no signs of struggle. No broken bones, except the hands. Every finger snapped, deliberately as if punished, as if interrogated. What were these rodents doing? Local legends spoke of the bark demons. Short, thick creatures with yellow eyes and the voices of children, said to whistle from the trees, mimicking lost monkeys, said to steal infants, said to wait until nightfall. When the forest dims and the screams go unnoticed, whistling was once considered coincidence. Some birds do it. After all, until one researcher recorded it. A short, rising pitch. Then silence. Then the exact same pitch played back, seconds later, from another direction. Not an echo, not a mistake, a response. He whistled again. A pause, then, from behind him, closer than before, 3 short clicks, like claws tapping wood. He ran. He never went back. What evolution did to these rodents cannot be overstated. Their brains were not simply larger, they were folded, It's more convoluted, suggestive of increased neural complexity. In short, they may have planned. They may have remembered. Some even say they mourned. One skeleton was found curled beside another, nose pressed to ribcage. Identical markings, likely siblings. One crushed by a falling tree, the other unmoved, untouched, long dead. No scavenging, just a quiet death beside the lost. But sentiment did not weaken their cruelty. Later camera traps revealed the hunt. Juvenile monkey perhaps lost, perhaps daring picking fruit on a low branch. Below, silence. Then movement, a rustle of leaves, a twitch of fur, then nothing. The monkey pauses. Then a blur. A thud, the monkey vanishes from frame. 4 seconds later, dash blood. No. Screech. No struggle, just disappearance. The rats had waited, buried themselves, timed their attack to the heartbeat of the trees. You don't feel hunted by a rodent. That's the trap. They made sure you never saw it coming. But the most unsettling evidence was recent. In a cave system below the island's central plateau, researchers found an ossuary. It's not just a pile of bones, but an arrangement, a spiral, a perfect spiral. Ribs, spines, skulls, centered around a pillar of stone. On the stone, marks deep, repetitive, as if they were etching. Some dismissed it as randomness. Others couldn't speak, but one anthropologist, pale and trembling, whispered what none dared say. These rodents, they had culture. We once mocked the idea of intelligent rats, called them myth, Disney fantasies, but the island knew better. It grew. Them fed them silence, starved them of competition, and they evolved not into monsters, but into kings. Kings of the underbrush, kings of cruelty, kings of cunning. And when the monkeys vanished, when the forest fell still, when the screams faded into memory, the rats did not rejoice. They waited, because predators do not kill for hunger alone, they kill for legacy. And these rodents, they remember, they are still there. Under the roots, beneath the trees, teeth sharpened, eyes glowing, listening. Shall I expand? Chapter 8. The Night Crocodile next. You said, expand chap 8. ChatGPT said, here is the full 3,000 plus word cinematic prehistoric horror science. Expansion of Chapter 8, The Night Crocodile, written in poetic. Terrifying prose in the style of the sleepless historian, blending fossil evidence, horror psychology, and evolutionary madness. The Night Crocodile expanded chapter. 3,000 plus words. Some predators belong to the light. They lurk in the open fangs. Bared under the sun, thrashing in rivers, roaring across plains. Their strength is invisibility. They want you to see them coming. Lions, wolves, eagles, but others. Others belong to the dark, not just in setting, but in nature. They are not hunters. They are hauntings. And none wore that darkness better than the creature we now call the night crocodile. Its real name, long and knotted in the language of paleontology, was Voe obscurus, nocturnus, but on the island, where evolution ran wild and nightmares carved bone into fact, it had only one name, the thing that watches. This wasn't your modern Nile crocodile, massive, but predictable, sunbathing on riverbanks. This was no basking lizard. This one had evolved differently. It did not need the sun. It did not want the sun. Its skull was shaped like a spearhead, wide and low with eyes angled forward, predator eyes not for scanning rivers, but for peering through dense jungle, and unlike other crocs, it had eyelids that could shut entirely and silently, not just the translucent nictitating membrane. Its eye sockets were lidded like a cat's, capable of hiding their shine from the moonlight. Even more horrifying, it blinked sideways, not like a reptile, like something else, like something wrong. Its skin, when fossilized, bore the imprint of rough, asymmetric scales, likely jet black in color. Not for camouflage in water, but in shadow. In the night jungle, where even the stars feared to look. But the most disturbing feature wasn't its shape. It was the teeth. Unlike modern crocs, whose teeth are narrow, cone-like, and perfect for gripping, Voe obscurus had serrated dentition like a shark, sharp backward-curving blades designed not to hold prey, but to slice through it. A crocodile that could chew, and it wanted to chew. Fossilized bite marks on bones of giant lemurs scattered across dozens of sites tell the story. Not death by drowning, not ambush from water, no crushed skulls. Instead, limbs missing, spines severed, and in one case, a skeleton of a juvenile monkey that had been skinned. The skin was not present, but the bone showed marks of precise flensing deep. Shortcuts, too regular for scavengers. Something had peeled it. Even worse, the bones were found in trees. A crocodile in the trees, this island did something to them. Stranded. Isolated. Their aquatic world shrinking. These crocodiles adapted or died. Over millennia, some began to hunt inland, then higher, climbing low branches, crawling through vines, learning the trails of monkeys, birds, and even small primitive hominins. Their limbs grew stronger, less paddle-like. Fossils show a shift from flattened feet to more vertical, claw-like digits. Their tails lost their powerful swim muscle, curve replaced with tendon, ridges for balance. Balance not needed in water, but on land. Balance for climbing, balance for stalking, and then skull. In some specimens, the brain case had expanded slightly not. Enough for reasoning, but enough for pattern recognition, enough to track migration, enough to remember nests, enough to plan. These were not ambush predators. These were night planners. They had patience. And patience is horror's favorite weapon. The local oral histories speak of a creature called Nandari, in Old Tongue, the second shadow. Not because it looked like one, but because it followed yours, silently, slowly, until your own shadow faded at dusk. Only it remained. One legend tells of a girl who wandered into the jungle at twilight. Her footsteps echoed, then stopped. She turned. No one. Sound, once born, should scatter. It should reverberate. Echo decabit on this island. Sound had rules, and those rules were broken. There were places where you could scream and hear. Nothing. Not the trees swaying. Not the waves crashing. Not even the rasp of your own breath. It wasn't quiet. It was devoured, consumed. Mid-air, stripped from existence, and something listened as it fed. The fossils were first found in a cave, so dark it swallowed flashlight beams. A labyrinth carved into. Volcanic bone untouched for millions of years. No light. No noise. Just thousands of skeletons hanging from the ceiling, like chandeliers of death, and at the center, a skull. Large, elongated, fanged. But it wasn't the teeth that chilled the researchers. It was the ears. Massive. Hypercurved auditory. Structures, asymmetrical and ridged, suggesting a creature that didn't just hear sound, it hunted it. They called it Echovernix obscura, the black echo warden, and it was no ordinary bat. Wingspan, nearly 6 feet. Musculature, powerful, enough to launch vertically without a drop, but most terrifying, its larynx. This was not a sonar generator. It was a weapon in most bats. Echolocation is gentle, soft clicks, navigation whispers. But this creature had evolved a sonar scream so dense it could burst eardrums at 20 meters. It did not navigate with sound. It erased with it. Sonic warfare. Biological sound collapse, it would dive through the jungle night, releasing infrasonic blasts so low that human ears could never register them, but our bodies could. Victims were found with lungs collapsed, inner ears bleeding, hearts ruptured not from claws or teeth but from pressure. The bat's scream did not echo, because it killed the space that made echoes. But what did it eat? The bones suggest a carnivorous diet, bones of birds, reptiles, even other bats found shattered beneath its roosts. But the stomach contents, they tell a different story. Microscopic analysis revealed crystallized inner ear bones cochlea and stapes delicately removed, piled together like trophies. That's not hunting. That's ritual. It didn't just want flesh. It wanted sound. The mechanisms of it, the organs of hearing. One theory, it fed on bioacoustic feedback, consumed not the creature, but the signal within it. In other words, it wasn't chasing animals. It was chasing listening. It tracked those who heard, and it punished them for it. Locals spoke of the night that fled, an ancient legend of a time when the stars vanished and the jungle hushed itself, a night when even the insects stopped chirping, when hearts slowed, when the air itself seemed. Stunned, they said, when you hear nothing, you are not alone. You are being heard. There's something deeply biological in our fear of silence. Not peace, not quiet, but that pressurized stillness, the kind that rings behind the eyes, that makes you question if you've gone deaf, or the world has ended. That's the silence this creature lived inside. It turned sound into prey. It hollowed noise. It made the jungle forget how to speak, but it was more than predator. It was evolution's rebellion against the act of listening itself. Over generations, this bat had evolved not just to consume sound waves, but to manipulate them. Its wing membranes had microscopic ridges, complex sound-diffusing patterns that could scatter returning sonar signals, meaning it could cloak itself from other echo locators. It didn't just vanish visually, it vanished acoustically. One researcher, Dr. Lena Verovic, went missing while studying the cave system. Her last notes, scrawled in graphite on the inside of her tent wall, read, "I heard nothing, not even myself. My scream stayed in my throat, but I felt it vanish, as if the air swallowed it before I could even try." The jungle is not empty, it's full of something that doesn't want to be found. They never recovered her body, only her recording device remains stopped at exactly 3:33. No sound on playback, just 11 seconds of perfect digital silence, then a pulse, low, vibrating, then static. But what happens to evolution after silence? Here lies the horror. Some biologists believe this bat had evolved eccodominance, a phenomenon where its brain could map space through the absence of returned signals, like negative photography. It didn't see sound, it saw the holes in sound, and through those holes, it hunted. Meaning, even if you were silent, it could find you, especially then, because stillness was its spotlight. How did it die out? Or did it? Some suggest the prey adapted evolving deafness, silence rituals, or night burrowing behaviors. Others believe climate shifts altered the bat's echolocation abilities, collapsing its biosphere. But a darker theory exists, that this creature did not die, it simply left the sumdus. It exists now in frequencies we don't hear, sonic, ultrasonic, outside. It's the human range, listening, waiting, and if that is true, then the next time you find yourself in the forest or deep inside a cave, you're walking home through a fog that feels too dense. Stop, listen, and if you hear nothing, not your footsteps, not your heartbeat, not even the wind, do not scream, do not run, do not listen, because something is listening for you, and it is hungry. For your breath, your voice, your presence in the sonic world. It is not hunting your body, it is hunting your sound. Beneath the waves off the coast of Japan's Yonaguni Island, something sleeps, something ancient, not quite alive, not entirely dead. It lies in the blue quiet, not far from the surface, waiting for eyes to notice. It's not a city in the modern sense, nor a temple or a tomb, but a shape, a geometry, a story carved into stone and time. Divers descend in silence, their bubbles like prayer beads drifting toward the surface. And then they see its straight lines where none should exist. Stepped pyramids where tectonic shifts should have left chaos. Giant archways and megaliths, arranged like a forgotten code. Nature, some say, a trick of water and erosion. But others feel watched. They speak of a pressure in the water, as if memory itself resists being disturbed here. The stone is not just stone, it is fossilized implication, silent accusation against the arrogance of our timeline. The Yonaguni Monument, as it's called, sits like a drowned monolith of lost civilization, one either impossible or too ancient to bear. No writings, no bones, just this. An impossible structure, sitting just under the veil of the modern world, hidden until 1986. How many things have we not seen because they lie beneath water, not stone? The monument's lines are too clean, the corners too perfect. Terraces span like an Atlantean ziggurat, while rectangular holes mark passageways that seem designed for something, someone, but we do not know what. The Japanese government has largely dismissed it. Academics scoff. But there are those archaeological dissidents, deep-sea dreamers, and seekers of ancient truths who swear it was made, not born. That a civilization, swallowed by rising seas long before written memory, carved this place as a bastion, or as a warning. What would an ancient people need to warn us about? There are rumors, fragments of whispered local legend, spirits who rose from the sea to walk among the forests wearing the skin of animals, of gods whose temples were drowned to trap them beneath the tide, of a moaning stone that hums when storms rise, as if the very ocean weeps through the cracks. Some divers swear they've heard it ata near resonance, like wind in a tomb echoing through the channels of the monument. Others say lights dance across the submerged walls at dusk, as if the sun itself remembers something we've forgotten. We think we understand extinction, but Yonaguni asks a darker question. What if some things never went extinct? Just submerged? Nikas think of the island's geology once connected to Taiwan and mainland Asia during the last ice age, when sea levels were lower and land stretched across now-drowned seafloors. Creatures, massive reptiles, archaic mammals, early humans, or their ghostly cousin Skudov walked here, lived here, built here. As sea levels rose, the world shifted, and their time sank with it. Yet on the island, in its limestone caves, bones have been found in unusual primates. Oddly shaped deer, strange birds with twisted skeletons, not enough for a species, not enough for a story, but enough to hint at something that Yonaguni is. Not just haunted by myth, it's haunted by biological memory. In these waters, even today, the bizarre continues. Deep-sea sharks with translucent skin and grotesque jaws, gigantic squid that brush the seafloor with their tentacles, fish with limbs that bend like elbows. They congregate near the monument, some say, as if drawn to it by something more than chance. A magnetic pull, an ancestral call. And what of us? Humans have always feared the ocean, not just for its size, but for its hunger. It devours whole cities, whole islands, whole epochs, yet it never gives them back whole, only in fragments. Yonaguni is such a fragment to geological Rorschach test onto which we project our nightmares. Was it a city? A signal? A grave? Something worse, a doorway? If it is a doorway, to what? Divers have mapped parts of it, but no complete survey has ever been done. Visibility is inconsistent, the water's treacherous, and currents unpredictable. Cameras malfunction, lights flicker out. Some expeditions have abandoned dives altogether due to what they call equipment distress. A term that could mean anything, but often means this: the machines don't want to work there. When machines fail, we are left alone with only our eyes, our breath, and the pulse of something deep. This is where things bleed into horror. Consider the theory that the monument was not carved by humans, but by something pre-human. Not an advanced civilization, but an intelligent species that never made it to the surface world one, whose development was aquatic or semi-aquatic. Something that evolved tools, memory, art, but never light. Creatures of tide and tectonic. Silence, whose hands were webbed and eyes adjusted to the dim. Who carved the monument not as architecture, but as echo chamber, song prison, or nesting structure. When the sea rose, it didn't drown them, it brought them home. The idea is fringe, heretical, impossible. And yet, in 1997, a team of divers reported seeing what they described as grooves worn into the monument's flat surfaces parallel, repeating, unnatural. Like something scraped the stone, again and again with a rough precision. Coral doesn't grow this way. Water doesn't erode in lines. Some suggest these are tool marks. Others whisper something more disturbing. Feeding marks, feeding on. What? The question drips like cold water in a cave. What if these creatures, whatever they were, survived not on fish or algae, but something closer to us? What if the stories of the sea spirits are not symbolic, but ancestral memories? We think our terror of the deep is poetic. What if it's biological? Now, let us drift from myth to paleontology. The fossil record in the Ryukyu Island chain shows a strange trend. Species that are smaller, species that twist, species that isolate, adapt, and sometimes die screaming in their bones. There are fossilized jaws with stress fractures, signs of interspecies violence, or worse, predation. Bite marks on the bones of pygmy elephants and extinct crocodiles that do not match any known predator. It is as if something fed on them, something without a name in any textbook. Was it real, or just the chaos of an island system rewriting biology in its own language of hunger? And yet it always returns to Yonaguni, the drowned shape, the unnatural angles, the way it sits facing the open sea like a sentinel, not toward the land, as temples often do, but out into the abyss. Something, or watching. Some have compared it to the moai of Easter Island, or the sunken temples of Dwarka. But Yonaguni is colder, older, more silent. It lacks even the mercy of inscription.
Ow.
It speaks no tongue, leaves no god names etched in stone. It simply is a wound in the ocean floor, pulsing softly, never healing. Japanese folklore warns of Yumabuzu sea monks, giant creatures with dark forms and faces like monks who capsize ships. Are they echoes of something real? Early humans may have seen something breach these waters long ago, something not quite fish, it's not quite man, or perhaps what lies under Yonaguni isn't a city at all. Perhaps it is the corpse of a creature too big to name. A leviathan, fossilized in its death spasms, cracked into angular shapes by time and pressure. Its ribs mistaken for steps, skull for terraces, its hollow mouth for a corridor. The monument isn't man-made or natural, it's a monument only, because we need it to be. In truth, it's a body, a carcass. And somewhere inside, the heart still beats. This is the horror of Yonaguni. Not that it exists, but that it refuses to be understood. In the end, the monument is less of a mystery and more of a mirror. It reflects our need to make meaning out of stone, our dread of the sea's silence, our fear that we are not the first intelligence to walk or swim this earth, that others came before, and when their time ended, they built no pyramids, left no papyrus, only a shape in the deep, a whisper in the dark, and a terror we can't name, which waits for us still. Asterisk. There are some things the wind should never carry. In the haunted stillness of this island's higher cliffs, where the trees bend like old men whispering secrets to the sea, a shadow once flew that didn't belong. It sliced through the fog like a riddle in motion, long, thin, unnaturally shaped, with wings too rigid to flutter and too silent to be born of feathers. There were no chirps, no flapping, no calls to mates only, the eerie mechanical hush of muscle over bone. It was not a bird, it was not a bat. It was a failure of natural law, dressed in the borrowed silhouette of a flying thing. This was an animal whose wings had become blades, living guillotines sharpened not by evolution, but by desperation. Gliders had arrived here, once fruit bats perhaps, innocent winged mammals clinging to the folds of wind as they sought new fruiting. Trees, but time. Time is a terrible sculptor. It doesn't chisel, it corrodes. What landed here centuries ago did not remain as it was. The trees bore no fruit, the ground bore no mercy, so the wings that once spread to carry them between forests changed. They narrowed, stiffened, angled forward like razors in flight. Evolution taught them not how to fly farther, but how to kill while flying less. we found fossils. Hollow bones wrapped in ridged edges, a scapula reshaped into a launch mechanism. Talons adapted for slicing midair, nocturnal sockets wide, and forward-facing not for depth, but for stalking. These weren't foragers. These were airborne assassins. And on a small island, where territory means survival, the sky became a coliseum. A floating battlefield where stealth meant sustenance, and hesitation meant starvation. Once, perhaps. One of them dove wings tucked tight like a silent harpooned ward, a creature on the forest floor. Maybe a small rodent that had evolved too. Slowly, unaware, the sky had grown fangs. A single slicing impact. No cry, just red in silence. And above, the shape vanishing again into the fog, not needing to return for the rest of the kill. Because this wasn't about hunger anymore. This was about dominance, territory, terror, and the bones we've found. They tell stories not of peaceful flocks, but of violence in the air. Wing bones broken, not by accident, but in combat. Multiple talent marks across skulls. Skirmishes at dusk, where one predator tried to remove another from the sky permanently. Survival meant being the last shadow above the trees. The island forced a choice: become the hunted, or become horror incarnate. Evolution, on most continents, proceeds like a symphony, gradual, melodic, harmonic in its chaos. But here, on this forsaken patch of volcanic rock and poisoned wind, evolution played no melody. It screamed, it stabbed. It broke things down until only weapons were left. These animals weren't designed for peace. They were designed for the thrill of killing in the air. For the nightmare of being hunted from above by something that never makes a sound. Imagine walking through that jungle then. Imagine the quiet, the real, soul-wringing quiet. You're beneath a canopy, eyes low, body tight with caution. But above, something is waiting. Not moving, not flapping, just a silent cut against the light, angled and watching. And when it comes, it doesn't swoop. It drops like a guillotine wrapped in flesh. You don't hear it, you don't scream, you just fall. Last thing you see is a wing where there should be a sky. We call them cut wings in the unofficial fossil notes. An animal whose name had to be invented because no known genus, no living family tree, could describe what they were. Perhaps somewhere in the mammalian lineage, they still lingered genetically. A twisted offshoot of Chiroptera, perhaps. But these were no ordinary bats. They had evolved to punish the skies. And what's even more unsettling? They didn't just kill to feed, they killed to fly. Blood in their mouths made them lighter. The act of the kill allowed their bodies to metabolize the chemicals that powered their unnaturally stiff flight. Fossil analysis shows heightened adrenal structures, overactive. Thyroid cavities. This wasn't just carnivoriad. It was biochemical madness. They needed the chemical rush to survive the wind, like a plane fueled by panic. So each kill wasn't a meal, it was a dose. And the longer they lived, the more manic they became. You can tell this from their skulls elongated in later specimens. Bone density reduced to make room for swollen neurological tissue. Their brains were becoming unstable, overclocked. Flight and kill, until the system overloaded and they plummeted, twitching into the canopy below. Wings shredded. Hearts ruptured, victims of their own grotesque ascent. There's something to be said here, something ancient and cruel about the price of adaptation, about how wings, given time and isolation, can forget beauty and remember only utility. What once allowed escape now demands destruction. And in a place like this island, where normality is a curse and survival a punishment, even the most delicate animal becomes a demon in the right wind. Look to the cliffs again. Feel the fog curling at your neck. Listen for the sound of nothing. Oh, that's how they came. It begins with the soil black, thick, and clinging like old guilt, a rot that doesn't come from decay, but from a memory buried too deep. The jungle above is lush, a dripping green madness of tangled vines and insect cries. But dig. Just a little, a few feet down, and you'll hit it. The bones. The tunnels, the chambered horror that nature tried to bury but couldn't quite forget. Because beneath this cursed island lies a second world, a hollow, breathing grave that was never meant to be unearthed. A labyrinth grown not by architecture but by biology, by the blind, the buried, and the ancient art here beneath the tangle. Of roots and volcanic stone, creatures lived that never saw the sun. They didn't need it. They had no eyes, had no pigment. They didn't move toward life. They fed on silence, pressure, and the strange chemistry of things left behind. In this darkness, evolution did something unthinkable. It created animals built like puzzles, modular, shifting. Living matter that could bend, shrink, fold, or flow through the narrowest gaps. Spinal structures without vertebrae. Teeth that detached and regrew in new places. Entire species that wore their own molted skin as armor, dragging it behind them like gravecloth. It's no wonder we almost missed them. The fossils weren't obvious. They were found in collapsed tunnels long, spiral borings in the bedrock, too smooth to be natural. First assumed to be geological anomalies. But the patterns told another story. Perfectly aligned gouges, a repeat of strange mineral residue. Traces of an acidic compound we still don't fully understand. It wasn't ROCKFAL, it was excavation. These creatures didn't dig with limbs. They eroded with flesh. They softened stone, the way time softens memory, relentlessly, quietly. And they lived not just in tunnels, but in systems biological cathedrals, each chamber repurposed for a function. One for breeding, another for molting, a third for collective feeding. Their ecosystem wasn't scattered, it was designed. A hive without hierarchy. Species that worked not as individuals but as one massive, distributed intelligence. One fossil nicknamed the Architect was found encased in solidified clay. Over 9 feet long, though composed of segments no wider than a finger, its head bore no sensory structures, just rows of interlocking tendrils that likely responded to temperature or vibration. Its body tapered into a fleshy, root-like mass that fused into the tunnel wall itself. It didn't move through the labyrinth. It was the labyrinth. And yet, even in this darkness, war found a way. Other fossils tell of predators that entered the underground. Blind serpents with plated skulls and jaws that opened not vertically, but sideways like trapdoors. Teeth designed not to pierce, but to clamp and crush. And in response, the tunnel creatures evolved mimicry. Flesh that mirrored rock. Skin that pulsed in rhythm with tectonic vibrations. Some grew eye spots that stared from walls, not to see but to trick. A predator lunges for a false face and collapses into a pit of acid carved with precision. The hunter becomes the fertilizer. Even now, exploring these ruins is perilous. Tunnels collapse without warning. Oxygen thins. Sounds echo strangely, as if the island itself is listening. In some chambers, cave explorers have found shapes that don't belong, fossils arranged in circles, not by water flow, but as if placed. As if something was counting, waiting, remembering. And what's worse, in the deepest tunnels, nothing fossilizes. Not fully organic material persists. Cells half dead, proteins intact, as though something in the soil prevents decay or forbids. Release. Samples brought to the surface show faint biochemical activity. Not life. Not quite, but resistance. As if death here is not an end, it's only a refusal. One researcher, Dr. Ellen Kira, made it farther than anyone else. She descended past the 900-meter mark, where the bedrock begins to pulse from geothermal stress. Her last audio recording, crackling, distorted, captured her voice whispering, "It's breathing, not air. It's breathing us." And then nothing. Her helmet was found 2 months later, resting upright at the mouth of an unmarked shaft, as if returned by something that didn't want it anymore. What lived here may not have died. It may simply have retreated, perhaps, still pulses in those subterranean halls. Not as an individual, but as a memory kept in blood and bone and echo. A biological ghost that refuses extinction. A nightmare that learned to wait, because some things aren't meant to climb toward the sun. Some things are meant to stay buried. The wind never stops here. Threads through the jagged rocks like a whisper made of razors, and even on still nights it moans along. Hollow note that rises from the center of the island's oldest scar, the crater. But this is no ordinary volcanic basin. No gentle collapse from molten exhaustion. This hole in the earth is wrong. It doesn't taper naturally. It plunges straight and narrow, the shaft of some ancient, forgotten weapon, as if something from above punched into the crust and ruptured the rules of life itself. And around its rim the trees don't grow right. Their bark peels in patterns. Their branches twist into unnatural spirals, and some lean toward the pit. As if listening, it was first thought to be a caldera, formed during the island's last violent geological upheaval. But the stone at the base was glassy, not igneous fused by heat, yes, but not from below. It had been flash-burned, atomized, and reformed. And in this burned bed lay something stranger still, fossils that should never have been preserved, creatures that had no business existing side by side, fish bones fused with feathers, amphibians with segmented insect legs, reptilian skulls, bearing mammalian molars, chimeras monsters, born not from evolution, but from trauma. From an event so violent it rewrote biology, the crater is a wound, not just in stone, but in time. What caused it? Some proposed an asteroid, a long-lost fragment from the deep solar system, but no iridium layer, no impact spatter. And the magnetic field here is twisted, wrapped around itself like a coiled serpent. Compasses spin, batteries fail, birds veer off course and plummet. And deep inside the pit, far beneath the layers of fused glass and crushed strata, lies a cavity. Hollow, dry, and riddled with teeth. Not fossilized teeth. Loose ones, ungrounded, unrooted, and all facing inward. This is where the screams come from. Not from animals, not from wind, but from the memory of something that should never have lived. Explorers who descend into the pit report hallucinations of eyes blinking in the black, of bone rain, of trees growing upside down. One man clawed his own ears open, trying to escape the sound of a low-frequency hum, a hum no device could record. He said it felt like the crater was thinking. Local myths tell of the gash of the world, a place where the sky bled fire and beasts were birthed in flame. One tale speaks of a serpent made of smoke that came from the heavens and burrowed into the rock, coiling for centuries beneath the crust, its breath turning animals inside out, its dreams infecting the very roots of evolution. They say the creatures that crawl from this place are not born, but leaked formed from stray thoughts. From impressions left behind in the stone like fingerprints on wet clay. In modern times, drone footage was attempted. None returned. Each one lost contact within seconds of crossing the rim. Their final transmissions showing warped imagery, twisted topography, pulsating shadows, and what appeared to be movement at the crater's heart. Not seismic movement, not wind. Undulating shapes, almost vertebrate, sliding in and out of focus like something waking up between dimensions. And then came the fossils known as the smilers, rows of jawbones unearthed in the crater's periphery. But unlike anything previously cataloged, dozens of them, not attached to skulls, but aligned in parallel-like ranks, no two alike. Some had teeth like grinding plates. Others bore needle-like fangs that curved backward. One had human-like molars behind a lizard's beak. Each was arranged, smiling, as if something placed them, or worse, grew them. Carbon dating was useless here. The heat had warped the molecular structure. Isotopes jittered out of sync. With time, in fact, the bones themselves emitted a faint radiation, not dangerous, but wrong. A background whisper that didn't match the decay curve of anything known. Scientists called it residual emission. Locals just called it the curse. One paleontologist described a dream she had after handling a tooth from the crater. She saw a sky on fire, a rain of bones, and an animal massive, eyeless, cloaked in glistening folds of skin crawling across, the stars dragging a womb of heat behind it. She woke up screaming. Her fingernails had turned black overnight, and still the wind howls. Some believe the crater is not a birthplace, but a doorway, that the creatures forged in its heart were not just deformed, but designed prototypes of a different kind of life. Life that was not meant for land, air, or sea, but for transition. Life built to move between states, between epochs, between realities. And if that door ever opens again, it won't be science that answers. It will be instinct, terror, and a return to the most primal rule of nature, run, asterisk. There is a place on the island where the trees do not stand. They slump, half submerged in black water that reflects no light. It is not a swamp in the traditional sense, for it does not teem with life it waits with it. The air here hangs, heavy, saturated with a smell older than decay, a kind of breathless rot. And from beneath that surface, where silt and death have settled into layers like ancient manuscripts, something is growing. Something that remembers, they say, no birds sing over this swamp, that no frogs croak, that even the insects, those masters of every niche, will not lay their larvae here. And yet the water moves. Ripples form without wind. Mud churns without footprints. And sometimes, under the light of a cloud-obscured moon, the surface shivers like skin touched by a cold finger. Paleontologists once dismissed it as an overgrown oxbow lake, a forgotten crescent of river that no longer led anywhere, but sediment. Core samples told a different story. This swamp is not ancient, it's evolving. Layers of peat appear in the wrong sequence. Plant matter shows unnatural isotopic signatures. And strangest of all, beneath just a few feet of muck, the cores hit bone, not scattered, stacked vertebrae upon vertebrae. A spine too large for any known amphibian, a vertebral column, without end. As if the swamp is coiled around a single body too big to surface. They call it the sleeping spine. A research team once dropped sonar equipment into the mire, hoping to map its depths. What they found wasn't depth, it was shape. The echo returns formed patterns, repeating ridges, spiral like a coiled nautilus, and every 20 meters a void like an open mouth. The researchers dismissed it, called it a software anomaly, but they left before nightfall and never returned. Later, a trail camera caught something breaching, not breaking the surface, but bubbling through it, as if the water itself birthed a creature. It had no eyes. Its skin was translucent, webbed with capillaries that pulsed like veins under glass. And then came the teeth knot in its mouth. But along its spine, jagged uneven rows of bony protrusions, as if the creature's nervous system had tried to armor itself in response to its own nightmares. No species matched the footage. But somewhere, deep in an old ledger from the 1800s, a missionary had written of a swamp ghost on this island, a fleshless fish that walked at night, a whisper that left trails of slime across doorways, mother of mud. Some thought it was legend, others, metaphor. But then came the mimics, small animals from other parts of the island rodents. Lizards, even a juvenile bird, were found dead near the swamp. But their carcasses were strange. Each one had attempted to grow gills, their bones, warped toward an aquatic life they had never lived, as if simply being near the swamp had convinced their biology to change. The idea spread like a fungus through the scientific community that the swamp was emitting something, an enzyme, a pheromone, a frequency that inspired mutation, not by random chance, but by direction, as if the swamp was dreaming of a form. And everything nearby tried to become it. One experiment placed fertilized chicken eggs near the swamp's edge. 3 hatched, none resembled birds. One had a jawless mouth like a lamprey, another had scales instead of feathers. The third had no head, just a writhing, tooth-lined opening where a neck should be. It died screaming. Autopsies revealed something more chilling. Their DNA had not mutated randomly. It had regressed, as if time itself had unraveled in their chromosomes, pulling them backward down evolution's ladder. It's not to the dawn of birds, but to something far more primitive. Something that once slithered, blind and hungry, beneath ancient oceans. Somewhere along the line, the question changed. It was no longer what's in the swamp, but rather what is the swamp becoming? Fossilized impressions on stones near, Its edge revealed spiral-shaped footprints, not left-right, radial. Creatures with multiple points of locomotion, like sea stars, but with legs. Imprints that pressed deep into rock as if the creature had mass. And yet no corresponding bones were found. The swamp is digesting time. At night, people report hearing laughter, but not human laughter, more like the gurgle of drowning lungs, like bubbles rising from a submerged mouth, chuckling in slow agony. Sometimes there's a light, a flicker beneath the surface, green and pulsing, like a heartbeat made of algae. When approached, it disappears, and yet the trees along the edge lean in, as if worshipping. Some believe the swamp is alive. Others believe it is not the swamp itself, but what's beneath it. That something buried long ago, something massive, dreaming, with a nervous system that radiates upward, is rewriting the land around it. That every drip of sap, every mosquito egg, every tangled root is being taught to change, taught to merge, taught to become. The next version, a new ecosystem built on nightmares. There's a hypothesis now, unpublished, kept quiet, by those who've seen too much. It states that the swamp is not an ecosystem, it is an organ, a mouth, a feeding structure for something else, something coiled beneath the island, something that feeds on memory, on evolution, on possibility, and every time an animal drinks. From its edge, every time a bird flies too low or an insect lays its eggs on the wrong leaf, it is eaten. Not in flesh, but in identity, rewritten, absorbed, rebuilt. One day, they say the swamp will stop dreaming because it will wake up. And when it does, it won't crawl out of the water. The world will sink into it. In the windswept cliffs on the southern edge of the island, a discovery was made that turned every rule of paleontology into dust. Not far from the Black Swamp and its pulsing horrors, beneath layers of volcanic ash and compressed loam, researchers unearthed bones, or what they thought were bones embedded in a matrix of stone so hard it sparked under a pickaxe. The structure resembled a graveyard, a tumbling mess of skulls, claws, ribs, and teeth. Except there was something ... wrong. The skeletons were arranged, not naturally, but deliberately. A spiral of vertebrae, ending in what looked like the shattered remnants of a single eye socket, wide as a dinner plate. The teeth belonged to no species in the fossil, record serrated like a shark's, but fused into plates like a beaver's, designed not to kill, but to reshape. They had bitten through bedrock, and worse, they were fresh, not fossilized, not mineralized. These weren't bones of the dead. They were remnants of something still alive. Carbon dating failed them. The readings looped 20,000 years. Then 2 million. Then 30. The bones rejected time itself, as if they were trapped in a loop between extinction and rebirth. Some showed signs of wear, as if they had walked recently. Others had marrow so dry it crumbled into powder. But one specimen deep in the lowest strata bore something impossible, a hollow socket with a glass lens embedded in the skull. It wasn't man-made, it wasn't even functional. But it was eye-like, transparent, with filament-like nerves stretching toward a brain case shaped like a blooming mushroom, a predator that saw differently. The team dubbed it Specimen 13, shortly after its excavation. Strange things began to happen. Cameras malfunctioned, batteries drained, the air around the fossil. Sight turned colder by several degrees, though the sun beat down overhead. One night, a researcher was found babbling, barefoot, standing in the center of the spiral with eyes rolled back. He was whispering in a language no one recognized. When they pulled him away, he screamed, not in pain, but in loss. Almost here, he wept. I saw its final shape. It has roots. It grows into us. Later, his blood showed chemical compounds not found in any human system. Alkaline residues similar to those found in deep sea. Creatures, those that metabolize sulfur near volcanic vents. And then, there were the fossils that weren't stone at all. One vertebra, once removed from the site and stored in a lab refrigerator, began to sweat. It excreted a viscous amber fluid with a musky, briny scent. Inside the fluid were cells, living ones, not quite eukaryotic, not quite bacterial. They divided erratically, splitting in spirals, not down the middle. They clumped into fractal patterns, as if trying to remember a form they once had. When exposed to ultraviolet light, they shimmered. When frozen, they refused to crack. One researcher injected a sample into lab-grown mouse tissue. It screamed. Not audibly, but electrically. Every nerve fiber in the mouse lit up. And then slowly the tissue began to change. Hair follicles retracted. Skin darkened. Teeth elongated. Bones thinned. It took on the beginnings of a face. Not a mouse face. Not even mammalian. A face with 4 jaws, each layered with tiny cilia. A nightmare with hunger etched into its blueprint. They incinerated the lab. But the bones, specimen 13's remains, kept appearing. Pieces of it found in places it had never been stored. A jawbone behind the researcher's toilet, or a rib in the glove box of a sealed truck, a femur fused into the ceiling tiles. The bones were spreading. It's not physically, but informationally. As if awareness of the creature allowed it to manifest. Like a virus made of thought and fossil dust. One geologist had a theory. The bones were not remains, but seeds. Artifacts of an ancient creature not from the past, but from a potential past. A path evolution never took. These were fossils from an alternate timeline where different rules applied, where predators fed not just on meat, but on biology itself. A branch cut short in our world, but still lingering like a ghost, whispering its shape into the bones of our present. It would explain the teeth, the layered skulls, the vertebral spirals. All of it resembled the forms of our own world, but corrupted, repeated, bent, like evolution under pressure. Like memory passed through 1,000 generations of nightmare. The island, then, was not just a location. It was a boundary, a seam between what happened and what almost did. Some believe the bones are testing us, that each sample, each touched surface, each camera that captures them is a doorway. And through these cracks, something is watching, learning, reassembling, waiting for the shape it once had to return. In one of the final excavations before the site was sealed, paleontologists found a fossilized skull smaller than the others. And distinctly mammalian, it resembled a primate, relative of Homo habilis. But its cranium had split from within. Something had burst out of it, and in its mouth not teeth but suckers, like those of a leech. Below the skull, etched into the sediment in a spiral pattern, were claw marks. They read like a message. I remember you. And so the team fled. The site was buried again. The cliff collapsed, some say by accident, others say by intent. No one goes back, but the island remembers. The fossils that aren't fossils sleep beneath its soil, and in the stillness of night, when all is quiet, they shift. Something had been eating, was the first clue. Not scavenging, not stripping carrion like hyenas or vultures, not even the precision predation of a saber-toothed cat. This was different. In the undergrowth of the island's cloud-thick interior where mist wrapped every branch in a veil of damp. Humming rock researchers found skeletons, fresh, small mammals, birds, even amphibians, each picked clean. But not in the way nature usually does it. Their bodies were hollowed out from the inside. Organs gone, bones intact, eyes missing, brains scooped clean from the skull as if by a fine spoon at first. They blamed island scavengers, rats, monitor lizards, maybe even the oversized centipedes that curled under bark and hissed when exposed to light. But when they set motion triggered, cameras, nothing ever appeared, the food disappeared, the cameras glitched. One time, the entire forest went silent for 12 minutes. Even the winds stopped moving. Then, as if nothing happened, the jungle resumed its song, and the carcasses continued to multiply. The horror came into focus when a zoologist noticed the pattern. The kill sites formed a spiral, a perfect expanding spiral traced outward from a central clearing they hadn't yet explored, It was as though something had woken up in that point zero and was growing hungry. They entered the clearing at dawn. The air was still, naturally still. No breeze, no insects, just attention, like breath held by the island itself. At the center, they found it. A depression in the ground, perfectly circular, 6 feet wide, lined with a moss that bled dark sap when touched. Beneath it, shallow soil gave way to a kind of woven root network, like tangled veins, but these weren't plant roots. They were organic, cartilaginous. Something had nested there. Something that left no feces, no fur, no eggs, which trace molecules of acid and a scent that didn't register in the nose, but in the amygdala, the part of the brain that processes fear. Then came the howl, not loud, not vocal. It was a pressure, a low thrum that passed through the bones, not the ears. One of the researchers dropped to his knees and vomited. Another turned and ran until he tripped over his own pack, weeping, unable to say why. The clearing seemed to pulse. The zoologist took a sample of the sap-like secretion from the moss. Under the microscope, it revealed something impossible: spores. But these weren't fungal. They had cilia. They moved. They pulsed in unison, like they were listening. And under UV light, they contracted violently, like something had scared them. Life reacting to life. Later that night, the team's tent was torn open, not slashed, not shredded, melted. The material around the breach bubbled and curled, as if exposed to heat, but there was no fire, just silence, and then blood. One of the younger researchers gone? No drag marks, no struggle. Just a single handprint in the mud, four-fingered, long, the forest now totally, absolutely still. Even the birds had abandoned it. The jungle began to change. Leaves grew tougher, waxier, their undersides dotted with black pores. Insects took on grotesque features: extra mandibles, translucent plates, multifaceted eyes that reflected movement. Even in the dark. One centipede measured 3 feet long and hissed at infrared cameras. They found a tree bleeding from the trunk, sap running like dark honey. And in the sap were the outlines of small creatures: lizards. Frogs trapped like in amber, but they were still moving. Whatever had nested in that central clearing wasn't just a predator. It was a signal, a catalytic presence. It didn't eat for sustenance, it converted. Every living thing within reach, reshaped by its hunger, like a mold growing through biology. A hunger not just for flesh, but for form. And it was spreading. One night, the lead zoologist left a voice recording. "We were wrong," she whispered. "It's not an animal. It's not even alive. It's a memory. A behavior passed through soil and time. Predator that doesn't need a body, it just needs a pattern. So once you see it, it sees you. Once you name it, you let it in. It doesn't sleep. It waits." Her body was found days later, still warm, no sign of trauma, no blood. But her brain was missing. Removed with surgical precision. Da-da-da-da, and her eyes turned backwards in her skull, as if she'd been trying to look inward at the thing that had come for her. No one returned to that clearing again, but at night. The researchers swear they hear breathing from beneath the soil, not loud, not fast, just patient, waiting for its hunger to be remembered again. Chapter 18. The bones that didn't belong. Long before anyone stepped foot on the island with cameras and lab kits. Long before modern maps etched its silhouette into the world, there were stories told in whispers, etched in driftwood, scrawled on cave walls, now hidden by vines and centuries. The locals never gave it a name, not one they were willing to speak aloud. But among the coastal tribes, there was a belief. When the ocean no longer wanted what it held, it gave it to the land. And this island was made of such gifts. It began with the bones. A fossil team arriving by boat under a gray and listless sky stumbled on a cave barely visible above the tide line. Inside, buried beneath layers of black sediment and twisted tree roots, lay a pit filled with skeletal remains. At first they assumed it was a mass death site, a common enough feature in paleontology. Perhaps a sudden flood had washed a group of creatures into the cavern, where they drowned and decomposed over millennia. But the bones were too clean, too arranged. Vertebrae spiraled like coiled ropes, rib cages fanned out in perfect symmetry. Some skulls faced inward, others outward, as if deliberately posed. And then came the real anomaly. The bones didn't match. Some were from birds, yes, but not any bird known to science. Hollow-boned like gulls or albatrosses, yet with fangs embedded in their beaks. Other skeletons had mammalian hips paired with reptilian spines. One set of remains seemed to have 5 limbs force-splayed like a lizard and one protruding awkwardly from the sternum. They weren't just hybrid fossils. They were biological contradictions, anatomical heresies. Carbon dating was inconsistent. Some fragments dated back 12,000 years. Others, less than 200. The timeline blurred. One jawbone, still lined with serrated teeth, had tissue remnants that hadn't fully mineralized. Flesh turned halfway to stone, caught mid-conversion. A snapshot of decay in motion, and that's when they heard the scratching. From deep within the wall of the cave, behind the sediment, within the rock itself. What? Not like the rustle of rats or the trickle of groundwater. This was deliberate, rhythmic, like bone on stone, a dragging motion, claw tracing its way toward air. The team evacuated that day, but left motion sensors. That night, 2 were triggered. Nothing on the footage, but dust. And yet, by morning, the bones had moved. It wasn't until they compared their samples with specimens from neighboring islands that the full horror took shape. A vertebra from the pit matched the spinal structure of a Pleistocene predator, long thought extinct, but the scale was wrong. It was too big. Another matched the hip bone of a prehistoric dwarf deer, fused. 2, it was a pelvis from a primate. Evolutionary timelines were colliding. Fossils that shouldn't be from the same epoch were now fused like Siamese twins. Something on this island was undoing biology's rules. And then came the theory wild. Fringe UMPUBLE. What if the island wasn't a place where animals evolved into monsters? What if it was where failed experiments came to rest? Not by man, not by aliens, but by nature itself. A dumping ground. A fossil graveyard for evolutionary paths that had no future. In that light, the island made terrible sense. Every species that came here changed, morphologically, behaviorally. Some grew large, others small, others wrong. The laws of selection didn't apply in any recognizable form. It wasn't survival of the fittest. It was mutation of the forgotten. And the bones, they weren't remains. They were instructions. A genetic lexicon etched in calcium and time, blueprint left behind. Not to warn, but to seed. The island was not just hosting these creatures, it was remembering them, rebuilding them. And with every storm that uncovered a new fossil bed, every rainfall that washed sediment away from a buried skeleton, something below stirred a little more awake. Toward the end of the expedition, one of the team members disappeared. No signs of struggle, no blood. But his tent was found near the fossil pit, and beside it, footprint, elongated, inhuman, 6 digits, pressed deep into the earth, as if whatever left it had weight and purpose. The cave has since collapsed, so the reports say, but fishermen still refuse to anchor near that part of the coast. They say the tides are wrong there, they say sometimes. When the moon is low, you can hear something breathing beneath the cliffs, something that remembers.